Hello. This is just kind of like a broad overview of like all the different things that go into doing marketing for your game and stuff, and hopefully we'll give you some ideas of ways you can do that at a smaller scale, especially for all of us indies out there. Yeah, let's get started. So, hi, I'm Catherine. I'm the community and marketing manager at Armor Game Studios. I've got about 4.5 years experience working in marketing and community management across PC, console, mobile, VR. Um, I also went to RPI. I graduated back in 2017 from their game development and electronic arts programs. Um, how I ended up in community and marketing is a funny story, but that's not why we're here today. I also am known for knowing a lot about Neopets, and according to my Twitter followers, also being a rat. Which is its own long story, not related to anything. But yeah, so now you're probably wondering, Catherine, do I really need to market my game? This is something I heard a lot in college. I feel like every game development student says this like at least once. Um, and the game looks good, the gameplay is good. That's all I need, right? And I regret to inform you that yes, you do need to market your game, and I'm going to explain that with this graph. Which I am very happy to say finally Statista updated their graph for this. I've been using the same 2021 graph every time I've done this for a while, but yeah, to illustrate, here's like what you're up against. This is how many games have been releasing on Steam in the past, like 15, almost 20 years. Um, so if you like look, if you can see it, kind of like starting around like 2014 or so, the number of games on Steam kind of like exponentially increases. So yeah, I mean 2021, it says here like 10k, over 10k games on Steam, which is ridiculous and a lot. And in order to stand out against all these titles being released, you have to do something, and marketing is kind of, that's something. So like there are different ways you can kind of go about this to kind of help you give yourself that edge against a very competitive market. So you've got marketing, which is kind of like making sure people know how and where to buy your game. There's PR, which is making your game look good to people in the public eye. Community management, which is taking care of your players before, during, and after launch. Which kind of helps keep them invested. It kind of helps with that like word of mouth sort of thing that helps a lot of games do really well. And then social media management, which is keeping your players informed and entertained before, during, and after launch. So first things first, it's really important to know your audience. So this is kind of called a consumer profile. So you kind of have to figure out like who this person is that's going to play your game, like what kind of games do they play, how do people engage with these kinds of games, like in other communities and stuff. Where do they form their communities? What kind of interests do they have outside of games, et cetera, et cetera. And using this, you can make more informed decisions about where to market things, how to market things. So a big one is, again, studying marketing tactics for other games. Like, what are your competitors doing and stuff. Like, I'm not saying lift what they're doing, because you should not do that, but it's really good for inspiration, so you can figure out where you should be focusing your efforts mostly. Like, clearly this worked, maybe I could try this. It's kind of like inspired by what they did, or, a different twist on what they did. And many aspects of your marketing plan can be informed by this consumer profile. So it's like it's a pretty big one, I'd say, for getting the word out about your game. So again, about marketing, it's about making sure people know how and where to buy your game. And marketing and also PR are kind of like this really big umbrella category that have a bunch of different things inside of them. So some examples would include like running advertisements on social media, curating a weekly newsletter, appearing at trade shows, maintaining a social media presence, running live streams, releasing trailers. And like a lot of marketing does cost money, but there are ways you can do it with little to no budget, which is kind of the reality for anybody who's working in indie. I'll also get to this a little bit more later. And then PR is making your game look good in the public eye. So this is kind of a lot of building relationships with press and influencers, so you can kind of work with them to hopefully get some promotion for your game. So this can include securing coverage of your game from press, which is a pretty common one, I'd say. So this is great for like reviews, major news beats, if you have a high profile announcement, something like that. Writing press releases for any big announcements and hosting a press kit, which actually didn't add this to the resources at the end, but someone actually released a very like easy to set up like press kit tool like today, literally. I'll share that in the server sometime later. Influencer relations, so like this is where you're kind of giving your keys to streamers and stuff and reaching out to them and trying to do promotional things with them. So actually, yeah, going more into the influencer side of PR specifically, a big influencer doesn't usually mean good conversion. It can sometimes. It really just depends. So typically, like a strategy that's focused on getting the big influencers to play your game and nothing else is not very helpful because, usually like the small, like kind of like there's different tiers of influencers. And the really big ones, they tend to get a lot of views. They don't always get a lot of conversions. It depends. So usually the better investment is kind of more, the mid-sized sort of influencers. I think it's like 20K followers to like 500K followers or something around there. Because these communities tend to be a bit tighter knit. They tend to be more engaged in what the people are playing and stuff. And that in turn tends to be a more smart choice in terms of where to focus on things. But ultimately, like, you should be looking for people who really fit your game. So again, go back to that consumer profile that I was mentioning before and spend that time thinking about like, okay, so what kind of influencers does this kind of a person follow and stuff, and kind of focus your strategy based on that. Yeah, so like the smaller and mid-tier influencers are actually more effective, like I said. And it's really good to keep a friendly rapport with like press and influencers that you're talking to just in general, because you might find that they'll come back to you and try to reach out in the future and stuff, and they might be really good to work with, and you might want to work with them again. So it's always good to be nice. Being nice pays off. I don't feel like I should have to say that, but I'm going to say it anyway. And now we're going into community management, which is more about taking care of your players before, during, and after launch, which in turn helps keep them invested. So this is like the more obvious stuff, like creating a Reddit or a Discord or moderating Steam forums. Steam forums are fun. Sharing patch notes after major updates and stuff to keep your players informed. Writing development updates and things along those lines. So I'm just going to go through some quick Discord setup tips because they can be pretty helpful. So, like you can enable community features in the server settings to kind of make the onboarding process for new members a little bit easier. It also helps for, reducing bot spam and stuff, because they have to like go through and like read your rules, and then through the membership screening that I mentioned in the next bullet point, it's like read your rules and then click a check mark and then click the OK button to confirm that they've read your community guidelines and stuff. And the welcome screen is really good because it kind of lets you set up like, here are some places that you might want to visit when you join the server, and it helps get players a bit more engaged when they first join. So it's really good for improving retention and conversion. Obviously make an announcements channel, and then there's actually an option to turn the announcements channel into a special type of channel that lets people follow the announcements in their own server, which is really nice, honestly. It also kind of helps like visually separate it from the other channels so it stands out a bit better. Add custom emojis. I definitely found with Bear and Breakfast, like, people became so attached to the emojis. We just like, especially like leading up to lunch and stuff when there wasn't much stuff going on, people would just bond over emoji spam for some reason, which was honestly delightful. But they do add a lot of personality and stuff, and like when people use them in other servers, if they have Nitro, you can actually click on the emoji and it'll tell you if your server is like a public server, like what server that emoji's from. So there's a lot of little benefits to doing it. And then create channels that your community will actually engage with. So, figure out what people actually like about your games. And off-topic channels are actually really good. I remember talking to a colleague once about trying to engage a community for a game that, like, I don't think was out yet at the time. And the food for thought that I got out of that conversation was that um, even if people have your game, not everybody, or like even if your game is out, not everybody who's in your community might have your game yet. So it's a good way to kind of keep people around by giving them avenues of conversation that don't inherently involve the game, which I guess sounds kind of backwards in some ways, but it does make a lot of sense. I mean, giving people a place to kind of talk about things that they might be interested in kind of just helps keep people around. And categories are really good for kind of organizing things by topic. So, like, if you have multiple like topic themed off-topic channels, then you can make a group for that, and you can do one for just like your rules and your announcements, and then one for your general game channels and stuff, and then one for like even player support. And there's forums and stuff now too. So those are also an option for your server as well. But whatever you do, don't add too many channels, because I do find that people get kind of overwhelmed when there's too many channels going on. It's kind of intimidating, especially as a new user, to come in and be like, wow, there's so much happening here. I don't know how to engage with this. Um, so that's, again, some food for thought there. And do not have voice channels. They are notoriously difficult to moderate. A lot of community managers, especially professionally, do not like to have them because there's literally no good way to moderate them. Like, I know the Among Us server, they have special moderators who are only voice chat moderators, so that they can have that in their server, and they do have some like automation involved in it, but it's like a very surprisingly intense thing. So a lot of people, especially smaller devs, it's recommended to just not have voice channels unless you have to. You'll thank me later. I promise you. And also, please do this. I promise you, you will also thank me for this. I think you actually, if you set your server to a community server anyhow, I think you have to do this, but set your default notification settings to mentions. Mac, what are you doing? Sorry, I think Mac's just doing things. um, so if you set your notification settings to at mentions, it saves everyone a lot of headache. You're not getting as many pings every time someone sends a message or something. It creates a better, less disruptive experience, especially if your community gets really big and there's a lot of people messaging and stuff. Like, most people don't want to hear like 50 billion pings every time someone messages. So I would highly recommend doing this. And then obviously there's moderating your spaces, which is something that I really care about. I think it's very important for setting the kind of tone that you want for your community and the people who engage with your game and stuff. So obviously the most important part is making rules and enforcing them. It's about keeping them pointed so you're able to hold people accountable when they act up. Again, kind of goes back to setting that tone for the community and stuff. It really just kind of paints the larger picture of what is and isn't acceptable for people who engage in the space, and kind of helps protect not just yourself but other people in the space as well. And when moderating situations, it's really important to be proactive with them rather than reactive. So if you see a problem happening from a mile away, start thinking about a fix to that problem before it explodes. It sounds kind of obvious, but I mean, that's advice that I even got in my first games job, and it ended up being very helpful for me, like especially dealing with like really large communities where you will start seeing more problems happen just as a part of having more people in the space. It just kind of, even the nicest communities will sometimes have problems. So if you see a problem brewing, take care of it before it becomes bigger. And don't, on that note, don't discuss moderation decisions with anyone other than the person affected by it. I find that when you involve other users, like other members, in moderation decisions, it tends to cause a lot of discontent, a lot of infighting, a lot of arguing. And nobody wants that. It just makes a problem even bigger when it doesn't need to be. I think it's important to keep that privacy between you and the person who is involved with the issue, like the person who resulted in the infraction, and just leave it at that. Um, And if things get too stressful or you find yourself in a very difficult situation, it is okay to get up and step away from the computer. Even if it seems like things are moving at a million miles a minute and stuff, it's better for you to take that time to sit there and refocus yourself instead of rushing and hopping up and trying to fix things when you're a little bit dysregulated. And that's also another really big takeaway I've gotten from a lot of my other jobs. Like, trust me, it's like it's not good trying to moderate things when you don't have a level head. So take that time to breathe. The internet will still be there for you in 20 minutes, you know. Um and yeah, from here we can go to social media management, which is a very interesting topic right now for obvious reasons. But this is about keeping your players informed and entertained before, during, and after launch. So some examples of this include developing a social media calendar and creating content around it. I think I talk about this later, but like a social media calendar is kind of like some kind of like way to track when you are posting certain types of content. Um, and then like you eventually like essentially kind of like make some kind of like spreadsheet or something to actually write that content later on. But the calendar is kind of to make sure that you're posting things at a consistent cadence and you know acknowledging like important milestones and holidays and stuff, and just kind of keeping everything organized more or less. Crafting a brand voice for your product, so kind of like the character that you play more or less when you are uh, talking to people through the account. So uh, I guess good examples is like, you know, the Among Us Twitter, which talks kind of like very in like all like loose, like all lowercase kind, pretty humorous kind of stuff for. Um, there's a lot of examples too. Aggro Crab's another good example. Like it's kind of like the personality that you're using to talk about the thing that you're making, more or less. Bear and Breakfast, we did that through like kind of loosely in the voice of Hank the bear, so it was kind of like very low key, very kind, but also still pretty funny from here and there and stuff. Kind of, you know, makes it a little bit more on brand when you're talking to people, more interesting than just saying we're doing this thing at this time, you know. Um, Sharing important game information on your social channels, responding to fans who reach out to you, and then studying analytics on your posts to kind of understand trends and improve the reach of your posts and stuff. So you can kind of like sit there and look back and be like, okay, so I'm noticing that like these 3 tweets did really well. What about those tweets did well? Have we noticed any patterns and stuff? And it's something you kind of like figure out as you start to manage accounts and stuff more. But it's really helpful because it kind of gives you a better idea of like, can I adjust my strategy to make it more interesting and effective? And now we're going to go to, but what site do we use? And I have a special brand new slide for this one. It's really just whatever works for you. Different platforms have different benefits, different target audiences, work with different types of content better. Some require more time than others. Like TikTok is very notoriously a time sink, but it can also be a very effective time sink. Because while the content will take a lot longer to make, it's like you have to make like three, 4 videos a week at least, and you have to post them pretty consistently if you want to see any growth due to how the algorithm works. So it's like it's a lot of work, but people do see gains from that. Some people find really good audiences there. People with games that have really nice graphics sometimes find a lot of success on Instagram, stuff like that. And this also goes to my next point. I have no idea what's going on with Twitter. I'm just going to say that right now. It's kind of a mess right now, so I don't have any advice with what's going on with that, if you should still use Twitter as a platform, because it feels very uncertain right now. We will probably figure out as time goes on, but this is a question that I feel like a lot of community managers have been asking for a while. And then what's a content calendar? So I kind of said this before. It's just a tool that you use to plan the content that you're posting on your social channels. It could be a spreadsheet, it could be a Google Calendar, it could be a physical calendar, just whatever works best for you. And the bare minimum things to include in your calendar would be like the date you plan to post or the date that you posted the thing. the copy for that post, a link to any visual assets that you're using, and then also alt text, which is a really important accessibility tool for people using screen readers. Whether or not it's been posted yet, that's a really good one to track, I found. A section for notes, it could also be good to track your analytics in there. You might have a different way of tracking that. Again, it's kind of whatever works best for you. It's very flexible. I did not mean to go to the end of the PowerPoint. Hold on. And then yeah, let's go right into social media analytics on that note. Um, so engagement is the percentage of people following you or seeing your post who actually interact with whatever you're posting online. So this is a formula. You can calculate that by the total number of interactions over the total number of followers or impressions times 100. The reason why I say number of followers or impressions, they can be kind of swapped out, is impressions are kind of confidential data usually. So if you're trying to compare to competitor accounts, the best way to estimate that is by using follower numbers to kind of as like a comparison point, I guess. And then there's reach, which is how many unique people have seen your post. And impressions, which I swear is a different, which I swear is different, is the number of time your post shows up on someone's feed. So like reach is just like, again, unique amount of people who actually see your post, and the impressions are the number of times people will see that post, independent of how many unique users see it. But impressions are really important and give very accurate engagement rate calculations. So, because again, it's based on the people, like the number of times these things show up on people's feeds and stuff, compared to how many people are actually engaging with things, or the number of times that people engage with things, rather, which kind of gives a better understanding of how successful your posts are. Because social media, a lot of it's based on engagements, how often people are actually interacting with your stuff, and that'll affect the algorithms and things like that. So the number of interactions can depend on platform, the type of interactions for the engagement rate, I mean. So it could be likes, comments, and retweets on Twitter, but I've seen some like people recommend including like saved posts on Instagram as part of that metric too. So it's just like, it's something that you have to keep in mind for the platform that you're using, but generally you can calculate it by adding together the number of likes, comments, and retweets and shares on that post. And then yeah, there's a lot more terms that you could learn. I feel like these are the three most important ones if you're just getting started with social media things. So I'm just going to leave it at that. But yeah, I mean, these are the really, really big ones, and you want to focus on, finding ways to make more consistent engagement rates and stuff. Like consistent growth is more important than virality on social media, I'd say, because virality is kind of fleeting, but consistent growth helps, build up an audience over time that'll actually stick around and actually engage with your products and stuff. Which is why engagement rate also is so important, because it can be a really good measure of that. And I'm going to preface this very interesting slide with a quote from my CEO, John Cooney. Horses take time, and marketing also takes time. If you have a budget, yeah, I mean, marketing could also require money, but there are ways to make this more accessible for an indie team with little to no budget as well. You still kind of need some dedicated time, though. Dedicated time and manpower to getting the marketing done during development. Like, you don't want to wait till the last minute. You want to kind of start doing this like concurrently with development, start thinking about things, and you want to start like finding ways to allocate this amongst your team to make things a little bit easier. Even just a couple hours a week is better than nothing with marketing. But the time you put in is kind of, you get out what you put in, I guess, is what I'm trying to say here. So what are some things I can do on a budget? There's game dev hashtag trends like Screenshot Saturday and pitch a game. You could make a Discord or a subreddit. Subreddits can be kind of weird because Reddit doesn't like brands unless they spend money on the site. But Discord is always a really good one. Getting involved with communities like yours and your own community. Paying attention to what your players like about your game and making content and community events and so on around that. Running monthly or bi-monthly newsletters. There is a guy in the games industry whose like whole thing is he's known for writing newsletters and stuff. Like it can be a really effective strategy if you play your cards right. Or have a backlog of social media for you to kind of post consistently throughout the week. 2 to 3 times a week is usually a good one, especially if you're further away from launch and stuff. And yeah, and kind of from there, some recommended reading that I think is good. Literally anything by Victoria Strand's really good. She has made like a wealth of knowledge about community and marketing and social media and stuff available on her website completely for free, which is great. She also had a really good talk that she did with Dana Trabella at GDC a few years ago that was literally about doing marketing before your game launches that I would recommend watching because it's really good to think about marketing from like the second that you start thinking about like I like idealizing your game and stuff. Like being like, okay, so what kind of audience are we trying to hit with this game and stuff, and how can we build this game with that audience in mind and stuff like that, and kind of getting the ball rolling on marketing earlier in the process than you would think. And then there's the Game Discover Code newsletter by Simon Carles, which is really good. And then howtomarketatgame.com, I mentioned a guy who like specifically does like he's known for games newsletters and stuff. Chris Zukowski's a great resource. His website howtomarketatgame.com is again wealth of free knowledge in there. And he's done some talks for GDC too that I think are really helpful. But if you're interested in running a newsletter, especially, I'd recommend checking his stuff out. He's great. And yeah, that's about it. I talk very fast. So, yeah, does anyone have any questions?
I have a few if no one else does. I will ask one. I will ask one and then leave room for other folks. So one question would be, when you have an indie team, right?
Mm-hmm.
How much does having the individuals working on the team sharing the things that they have worked on, for example, the artists sharing their art, audio folks sharing their audio and things like that on their own personal accounts and to those other communities, is there any value in that, or is it not really so helpful?
I mean, that's basically marketing in a sense. Like, especially if those are like very key pillars to your game and stuff, there is like I don't really see the harm in like team members sharing things or you sharing those in progress pieces on your social media channels and stuff. Because it does help spread the word about that. It's like making people aware that your game exists and there's some cool stuff in it, and that could be really good, especially for an indie team that's like in development of a game and might not have too much to show for a while too.
Gotcha. Thank you. I will leave room for someone else to ask a question.
I have a question.
Yeah.
First of all, I just want to say thanks. It was a great talk, really helpful. I was wondering about like places to find market data, I guess, about players, especially on a low budget, because most of the ones that I found people talk about, like Quantic Foundry and these other things, seem to be behind paywalls that seemed a bit prohibitive. I was just wondering if you had any suggestions for that.
Steam Spy and Sully Gnome are the two things that I can think of that would be the most helpful that are free, but yeah, a lot of those things are behind paywalls and it's very annoying. But Sully Gnome is specifically good for influencers if you're trying to get data about how certain games performed in the influencer space and stuff. And obviously Steam Spy is just kind of historical Steam data and stuff. It's scraped from the site, I believe. Actually, the chart that I showed at the beginning was scraped from Steam Spy data on Statista. So those are probably the two free ones I can think of, but it's really difficult because everything costs money.
Thanks.
No problem.
Is this thing on?
Hi.
Hi. Okay, so my question, what advice would you give for, actually finding and defining the kind of people who might be interested in your game, especially if you don't really know what kind of audience, your game is likely to have?
Good question. I think a lot of that, I mean, obviously goes back to kind of looking at your competitors and seeing kind of generally what those audiences look like, which does involve some amount of like obviously research and sometimes could be helpful to kind of go into those spaces and see what kinds of people are interacting with stuff. Some of it could also just be like you sitting there and being like, who am I making this game for? Like, who is my audience in that sense, where it's just like, who do I want playing this game and stuff like that? Who are the people that would be in, like, what kind of things would somebody playing my game likely be interested in, stuff that's like related? Um, Kind of things like that. I don't know if that answers your question. It's a hard one, and sometimes you'll have to reevaluate, I found, where it's like you might think it looks like one thing, and then you start actually seeing people show up in your community, and then you're like, oh, well, my prediction of what kind of player would want to play this actually might have been a little bit off, and then kind of going and readjusting and trying to understand better throughout the process.
Yeah, I guess to start, I kind of ask because I am working on a small game that hope to be releasing soon, and it's a visual novel, and I know kind of the stereotype of what visual novels are, and this isn't that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, again, that's like something that you'd probably find benefit in actually spending time in communities where people take visual novels like seriously and not as a joke, you know? Like, I find that, at least personally from observation, I feel like it's a lot of like women and queer people who are very interested in visual novels, if that helps. Um, but again, it's like you have to kind of like go into similar communities for games like yours and just sort of observe and try to understand. Uh, like that audience from how it looks in other similar games.
Gotcha.
Does that help?
Probably. Thank you.
No problem.
I have another question.
Yeah.
So I could see a lot of this being applicable not only to marketing a game, but to marketing one's own skills as a freelancer.
Oh,
which I'm not sure if you have any familiarity but I was just curious. Yeah, so I was just curious what your thoughts are on something like that. Any different considerations or anything like that, to apply some of this to marketing, for getting work in the first place, to get a game to market.
I mean, self-marketing yourself is also a really important skill that ties into a lot of this. Again, finding the audiences you're trying to tap into, like Twitter. Again, I don't know what's going on with Twitter, but historically, Twitter's been a really good place for developers to interact with each other, which is kind of the audience that you're speaking to and stuff. So, like, finding ways to get your posts to show up on people's feeds by understanding, again, like, the content that they want to see and stuff. It's a lot of social media is definitely a numbers game for better or for worse. So it's like just like making sure you're getting your stuff out there and you're regularly posting stuff if you're trying to attract like more work and stuff like that. So you're showing up in the right places on Twitter in front of the right people. And then a lot of it from there is just, time and adjusting your strategy and stuff like that, I guess, if that's helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I do have a follow-up, but I've already asked 2 questions, so I want to make sure that we leave room for everyone else. Going once.
Hey, can you hear me?
Hi.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, hey. I got a kind of a timing related question. So you mentioned before that marketing should be started earlier, which I think makes a lot of sense, obviously, right? But is there like a more specific time where, because where you are in the game development cycle, like do you wait until you have pretty polished gameplay videos or just screenshots or just design work? Is there any time where you should really start thinking about it?
I think it depends on how far along your game is going, how long you expect development to go. Again, like starting to at least get some like little thoughts here and there when you're in the ideation process at the very beginning of development's always good. But in terms of like actually getting stuff out there, I mean, like obviously once you have stuff to show, once you have stuff to show that would look good on social media and stuff is always good. But I mean, that time kind of depends that time frame is something you kind of have to evaluate throughout the process. I wouldn't say wait until the game looks like it's almost done, because a lot of people do find a lot of success in posting like in progress things and stuff like that. I mostly specified that marketing takes time because I feel like so often I remember I went to a roundtable at GDC one year, and like I think the biggest thing that came up during that was a lot of indie developers being like, my biggest regret was waiting until the week before to start marketing. Like it really does take a lot of time and effort to build that audience up before your game comes out. So it was more just kind of like a healthy reminder, but there's no set time frame. It's whatever kind of works best for your game's timeline, I'd say. But at least like a few months out at the minimum, I'd say. A little bit more runway is always good, but yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
No problem.
I have a second one, but I don't want to jump in front of anybody who hasn't asked their first one. If somebody else.
I had a question.
Yeah.
Have you had any experience with like ambassador programs, something like game influencer or something rock? I forget what the name of it is. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Ambassador programs, like, are you talking about like having influencers that represent your brand and stuff?
Yeah.
That's not something I have a lot of experience in, quite honestly, so I'm not sure how much feedback I can give on that. But like, is that something you're thinking about with your game?
Well, my wife runs a seed business, and they're using that. I think it's more common in more retail.
Yeah, like AAA
just wondering
and stuff.
Yeah, AAA or retail isn't just like product. Well, I guess everything's a product, but
yeah. Yeah, I feel like I've seen that a lot in the indie space, honestly. I feel like that's something I've only really seen in AAA, so that's not something I feel like I'm qualified to give advice on.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you for asking, though.
Thanks for the presentation.
No problem.
I have a third question, but I want to make sure anyone who hasn't already asked a first or a second question gets to go first.
I've got a second one, if that's okay, Amanda.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Jamie.
Thanks. It's also related to, I guess, I've been looking at sort of marketing tips for games, but a lot of it seems geared more towards AAA or games with much larger budgets than anything I'm doing as an indie. Specifically, one thing I've seen is these sort of marketing personas, where it seems to be like a data analysis tool for games that have a much broader audience, where they like identify these trends and sort of make these like almost profiles of like play styles or types of players, like segments of their audience. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about that, and especially like applicability to indies. Like, I wonder if you're targeting a more smaller, like more niche audience, if that's useful still, or I don't know. Yeah, just any thoughts that you had on that?
Yeah, I think kind of going back to that player, like that consumer profile I mentioned before, I think the biggest thing is, if you're doing stuff based on observation, especially of competitors and stuff, make sure you're looking at competitors at your scale. Like games that are actually like on the indie side of things doing similar things to what you're doing. And again, just like it's a lot of observation, especially if it's harder to get like the hard data, because there's not a lot of market research for smaller games and stuff. Like just kind of like observing from these smaller communities, like this like kind of gives you a more realistic picture of what that consumer profile should look like, I guess, if that helps.
Yeah, thank you. That helps.
Second question.
Oh, yes.
So, when you're trying out a marketing strategy, could you talk to like sunsetting an unsuccessful, like say you were doing a live stream or like a dev blog or something that's not doesn't appear to be very effective? First, like how would you assess when would you consider an activity a failure, and then how would you sunset that for say there is a handful of people that are really engaged with it, but it's just taking too much time and isn't bringing in enough new customers?
I mean, obviously, the first thing I do if you notice that something has potential but is not immediately raking in the numbers that you want, obviously, again, the marketing takes time. It's a big one that you just kind of have to like watch and observe and stuff. But if you've tried a bunch of stuff and you just kind of like it feels like it's becoming a drain on your resources, because again, indie development, everyone's doing like 50 different things at once. Sometimes you do need to just kind of it's kind of a personal decision, I think. If it feels like it's becoming a drain on your resources, and no matter what you do things don't seem to be panning out quite the way that you want them to, it's okay to kind of realize like I think I need to cut back on this, just focus on the things that are working. So I guess the answer is it really depends on you and your bandwidth at the end of the day, if that helps.
Cool.
All right, question number 3.
Yes.
Regarding the social media content backlog, I was curious if you had any sort of advice on doing that, how to kind of create one of those. Sometimes it's hard to sort of think of one post, let alone like create a whole backlog, right?
Yeah, that's the fun part of copywriting is sometimes things will take 2 seconds, sometimes things will take 2 hours.
Yeah, so I was just generally curious. I would assume that doing things in batches probably saves some time versus like going, okay, every Monday I'm going to post a thing and then having to sit down on that Monday and figure out what you're posting. But
yeah. I would say that the best strategy is to set aside some amount of time, like once a week, to just sit down and be like, I'm going to crank out this many tweets for next week or something, and then have that ready to go, have that scheduled on whatever platform you use to schedule things if you're doing things that route, and just kind of having that ready so you don't have to do a lot of like thinking, like kind of like flying by the seat of your pants trying to think of things on every single day you're trying to post stuff. It's just a little bit more organized. It kind of gives you some more time to more meaningfully think about what you want to post and stuff. So yeah, I just like, once a week, maybe like an hour or two, I guess, if you're trying to keep it at a reasonable scale, just be like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get all these assets together. I'm going to spend the time getting my like gameplay footage and stuff that I want to post and stuff like that. Just getting all your ducks in a row and then being like, that's good, and I'm going to get that ready to go for this week. And then kind of feel, if you feel inspired to fill in things like during the week, like something comes up or you find something interesting that you want to post, you're welcome to kind of like supplement it from there. But that's kind of how I would approach it. Feels the most sustainable.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions?
I have a third. For a console game launch, calls to action about a Steam launch, in my mind, feel very different than a call to action for a console. But leading up to launch, is it still just the same, building up email contact lists, building up Discord membership? I guess, can you just talk to that a little bit?
Are you asking, like, is there a difference between, like, marketing, like, the approach to marketing a game on console versus PC? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I guess, like, is there any difference with the calls to action on those?
I feel like if you're primarily building a game for console, there will be like times where you're like, okay, certain communities would be better and focusing on certain outlets would be better. But I'd say that arguably the process, like at least the timeline and stuff would be pretty similar. You still have to get all these things done. With influencer relations, I recommend like slowly filling in your press list and your influencers list like sooner rather than later so that you're not scrambling right before launch and stuff. But I mean, like it mostly just changes how you approach things rather than the timeline at which you approach things, if that helps.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Timeline.
Any other questions? Well, if that's it, thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it. Hope this was helpful for all of you, and I'm glad you all came.
So much, Catherine.
Thank you.
Thanks.